Hey everybody, it's Ron, and I want to tell you a story about business and how that story changed everything. The antique store they were walking through smelled like old paper and dust, the kind of place where objects outlive the reasons they were made. Shelves were crowded with tools and signs and machines that once fit neatly into everyday life and now sat quietly waiting to be noticed again. Near the front counter, bolted to a worn wooden stand, was a small red machine with a glass globe on top and a metal crank on the front. A child pointed at it, curious in the way children are when they encounter something that clearly did something but no longer does. "What's that?" she asked. Her grandfather glanced over and answered without much thought, "A gumball machine." She reached for the handle and tried to turn it, and it didn't move. "How does it work?" "You put a penny in," he said, already turning back towards the shelves. There was a pause before the next question. "What's a penny?" That one stopped him, because the question wasn't really about coins. Pennies rarely function as money anymore. They don't set prices, they don't buy things. Most of the time they're treated as rounding errors or ignored altogether. But there was a time when a penny wasn't spare change. It was the price. Entire products were designed around that single coin. Factories engineered for it and retailers depended on it. Customers trusted it because it didn't change from one day to the next. One small piece of candy figured out how to make that system work at a much larger scale. But was the real invention the candy itself or the discipline of pricing? How did a 1-cent product help standardize mass market economies? And on February 23rd, 1896, did using a penny to purchase a Tootsie Roll quietly lock in a business model that modern retail still depends on? From Business Basics, I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the daily podcast where we explain stories that changed business forever. Every date on the calendar has a story where business reshaped the world. Today, February 23rd, that story takes us to 1896. The penny candy that made mass markets work. By the late 19th century, retail in the United States was still pretty fragmented. It was local and it was highly variable. Prices were often negotiated and inventory changed from town to town. Consistency, that was pretty rare. A product bought in one store might cost more in the next, or taste different, or not even exist at all, and that made national scaling of brands difficult. And yet, in 1896, a small, chewy candy called a Tootsie Roll was introduced with a very specific goal. It wasn't meant to be special, it was meant to be premium. It was meant to work everywhere the same way for the same price, 1 penny. At the time, a penny wasn't symbolic, it was functional. It represented a clean, fixed exchange that didn't require explanation or negotiation or even math. For retailers, penny pricing simplified transactions and increased turnover. For customers, it created trust. You knew exactly what you were getting and what it would cost. But designing a product that could survive at that price was harder than it sounded. Transportation was improving, but shelf life was still a gamble. Many of the candies out there melted or they spoiled or they broke down before they even reached the customers. Even small cost overruns could erase profit when margins were this thin. To work, the product had to be durable, consistent, and cheap to produce. Most products couldn't meet those constraints. And that's why the Tootsie Roll was engineered to do exactly that. It didn't melt, it traveled really well. It tasted the same every single time, and it could be produced cheaply enough that selling it for a single cent still made economic sense. And that combination wasn't accidental. It was a pricing decision first and a product decision second. What made the Tootsie Roll work in 1896 wasn't novelty, it was discipline. Once the decision was made to sell the candy for a penny, everything else had to conform to that constraint. Ingredients had to be inexpensive but reliable. Manufacturing had to be repeatable. And waste, that had to be minimized. There was no room for variation, because even small inefficiencies would break the economics. And that pressure pushed production towards what we call standardization. The candy's texture was dense and shelf-stable, which meant it could survive long journeys without refrigeration. Its shape and size were uniform, which simplified packaging and handling. Most importantly, its taste didn't change from batch to batch, which meant customers didn't have to wonder whether this one would be different from the last. That consistency mattered more than branding ever could. Retailers could stock it confidently, knowing it wouldn't spoil. Store clerks could sell it quickly without explanation or negotiation, and customers could buy it on impulse, trusting the price and the product to match every time. This was a quiet shift, but a meaningful one. By locking in a fixed price and engineering everything around it, the Tootsie Roll demonstrated that mass market success didn't come from standing out, it came from fitting seamlessly into the rhythms of everyday commerce. When Tootsie Roll hit the shelves, that logic took hold as penny pricing stopped being a novelty and started becoming a system. Over time, the candy grew into a national brand, eventually formalized as Tootsie Roll Industries, but the larger impact was structural rather than cultural. The real legacy of the Tootsie Roll wasn't nostalgia, it was training. Customers were trained to expect fixed prices and consistent products. Retailers were trained to prioritize speed and turnover. Manufacturers were trained to build systems that favored volume over margin. And that model, it spread. Shelf-stable goods became the backbone of national distribution. And along with that, fixed pricing reduced a lot of the friction. Standardized products lowered risk, and together they made it possible for businesses to grow beyond local markets without renegotiating value at every stop. As the penny faded from everyday use, many of the products built specifically around it, they disappeared too. Gumball machines became antiques, penny candy became a memory, but the logic that powered them survived. Modern consumers still follow the same playbook: choose a price point and then engineer relentlessly to meet that price point. Make the transaction effortless. See, the Tootsie Roll didn't just sell candy. It helped lock in a way of thinking about pricing that modern retail still depends on, even now that the penny itself is quietly slipping away. And that all began when Tootsie Roll first went on the market on February 23, 1896. I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the podcast that finds the turning points behind the headlines. To hear more stories like this, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And if you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to subscribe and leave a quick review. It helps more people find the story behind the business. And would you like to actually understand business without the fluff, the buzzwords, or the MBA language? Start by visiting us at businessdailypodcast.com.